Welcome back to another episode of the Deals for Dentists podcast. Through these podcast episodes, I will be interviewing dental professionals and companies and aim to inspire, entertain, and educate you on the best tools and technologies out there. My goal is to help make your practice and career more profitable, efficient, and most importantly, more enjoyable. Today, I'm joined by Sean Crabtree. He's the founder and CEO of the Crabtree Group. The topic we have for today is a very interesting one. It's about driving profitability by creating value in the dental workplace. Sean and I will be sharing our views and perspectives on the many factors we take as dentists and how these decisions influence the impact we leave behind being in the dental profession. As always, I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the Deals for Dentists podcast on your favorite podcast platform and our weekly newsletter so you don't miss any of our upcoming shows. Sean, I'm excited to have you here with us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate it.
And you're zooming out of near Nashville, Tennessee?
Zooming out of the great city of actually Winchester, Tennessee. So some of your viewers and watchers may have heard of Thames Ford Lake. We are right here on the shores of Thames Ford Lake, just about an hour south of Nashville.
Awesome.
Where by the way, it's warm and sunny today.
That's good. Hey, it's actually warm and sunny here. It's a rare occasion here in Massachusetts, but I've heard nothing but good things about Nashville, and it's on my list of places to go. I heard it's just such a great spot to be in.
Oh, it totally is. And for years, the saying was there are 100 people a day moving to Nashville. After COVID, it's like 1,100 people a day are moving to Nashville. Really, it's crazy. It really is crazy. But we love it. Welcome.
Awesome.
Come on in.
So, Sean, tell me all about the Crabtree Group and also about your new book called Dental Profits.
Dental Profits. Yes. So just real quick about me. And by the way, I appreciate you having me on. My company is the Crabtree Group. We are business strategists. It just so happens that we do that for dentists. So, what does that really mean? I mean, for the last 23 years, all I've done is work very closely with dentists and dental teams. Number one, I find out as much as I possibly can about sort of who it is, how it is, what it is, where it is, when it is that a dentist wants to be. And I view the practice as the vehicle that really can allow you to get there. So once we find out as much as we can about where they want to be, then we dive in really into the weeds and figure out as much as we can about where they are across all areas and departments of the practice. And then we help develop strategies that will intentionally take that vehicle called their practice and build it into what it is that they want out of their life. We're very good at that. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it. We, on average, our guys will grow about 49% as a whole, but it's not uncommon to grow. And by the way, growth is not always the number one goal. But it's not uncommon for them to grow 100%. And it's not uncommon for them to do that while working fewer days and fewer hours in the day than they did, in the previous year. And as I said, not everybody wants that growth. Everybody is looking for something differently, but when you get strategies in place that are intentionally serving where you want to go, it's like always the byproduct that the production, the collection grows. And generally, it is not nearly as much work or as much energy, as much effort to be able to get those great results. So that's sort of who we are and what we do. Like I said, I've been doing this for 23 years or so now, even though I look as young as you do.
You look 23.
No. Okay. Boy, you're being very kind.
You have a way better beard than I do. I'm trying to go full white like yours, and I just have these patches of.
Wait a minute. You mean you really would like to go all white? That's your goal, really?
I want to go full Bob Barker. One day he just showed up on The Price is Right, and he was all white and silver, and that's what I want to do one day.
Full on Bob Barker, man.
Yeah,
that's a new one on me.
That actually may be the name of my next podcast. Anyway, so goals and plan and a strategy. These are three words that we're not taught in dental school. We come out of dental school with minimal clinical skills. We have no idea how to talk to patients. We have no idea about business. form goals and to have a plan and then a strategy to get there. I mean, that is just so important for dentists of any age. And the younger you start with those things, the better it'll be, right?
Well, and yeah, you and I were talking a little bit about this before we jumped on. I mean, when you're young, not just as a dentist, but in any field, when you're young, you're dying to take your education and put it to work, and you really want to do the stuff that you've learned to do. And, and we all want to make a difference, and we all want to help. I think the biggest challenge is when you're young, not taking a look at things like you're talking about, where do I want to be 5 years, 10 years, whatever, down the road, and then intentionally laying out what you do in your practice so that it serves those things. Way too many times, and I know you experience this, I've read your book as well, way too many times, I think those of us that when we're young, we just jump in and we just want to help, man, and the intention is great until you wake up and you're just burned completely out of your mind, right? And I see that way, 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 way too often in dentistry. And the reason that I wrote this book is really because of that. I can't tell you how many times over the years that I've been asked, the number one question, Sean, how do I get more new patients? And, there are so many ways to be able to grow your practice without being on the never ending dollar tossing search for new patients. And that's the whole purpose of the Dental Profits book. It just doesn't have to be that difficult. And like I said, we've proven that over the last almost, nearly 25 years of working with dentists and teams from Vancouver to Barbados, all over Nassau and the Bahamas to the Great Lakes. It doesn't have to be that difficult. But I would say this, and you touch on it as well in your book, not that this is strictly limited to dentistry, but I think in most industries, when you get out of school, you're eager to use your education. When you're in school, you have the ability that everybody around you, of course it's competitive, but everybody around you is kind of like going through the same thing that you're going through. And there's that support group, even though it may not feel like it sometimes, but there's that support group and that collaboration. And man, when you're in dentistry, especially as a solo practitioner, you are out there, on your own. And the sad part of it is all of the things that you've learned to be great at clinically have very little bearing on your success as a dental business. There's been so many great books that have been written about this, and I touch on it severely in my book. Michael Gerber had a series of books called The E-Myth, where he talks about this same thing. We live in the greatest country on earth where anybody can become anything. But the person who, at the end of the day, who opened the Italian restaurant, they did it because they like one thing. They like making Italian food, but making great Italian food and having a very successful Italian restaurant are two very different kinds of things. And so that's why I wrote the book. Ultimately, it doesn't have to be that difficult. And this book shows you exactly how to make it less difficult, less stressful, less energy, less effort to be able to get a much better result.
Yeah, you nailed it with, in school, it's an extremely stressful time, but our peer engagement is at its highest. So I was with 99 other, classmates that were going through the same thing I was. We commiserated and we cried on each other's shoulders and we asked each other for help, and we were all there. And then you get out of school, and a lot of times we go into solo practice and we're on our own. So I think, reaching out to your peers and re-engaging is so important. And you also said another really powerful thing about the new patient situation. New patients, I feel like a lot of times can be this drug where you just keep wanting to get new patients. It's like an addiction. Yeah. But why do you keep needing these new patients? Something's going on where they must be, your existing patients may be leaking out a crack through the back door. But what is it, that's going on where you keep needing these new patients? So do you find that your initial consultation with these dentists and what their needs are and formulating these goals is just so important, and every practice and every dentist is so different?
Well, now that you hit on a couple of good things along with that great question. I think, listen, reaching out to your peer group, really important. And I don't disagree with that. I would say sometimes that may not be the healthiest approach, because again, your peer group are they're just like you, right? They're going through the things that you're going. Probably a better approach would be, if you understand you have a business challenge, then reach out to somebody who can coach you on the business, right? Like you wouldn't call your auto mechanic, if you're having a problem with your tooth. There's a great story that I have, one of my business partners years ago, we're traveling, around here like crazy. A couple of years ago, one of my business partners, we were on a flight back from somewhere, and he got up and it was dark, the plane was delayed. And so we were running late. He got up and went to the bathroom in the front of the plane and passed out. And the lights were off. And so nobody noticed it but me, right? So I ran up there and I'm helping him up, I'm trying to bring him to, and he passes out again. Well, the stewardess got on the microphone and said, "Hey, is there a doctor in the house?" And this guy up front, looked around to see if anybody was gonna volunteer. And so he raised his hand, and she said, "Well, check him out, see what's going on." So she checked him out, and what do you think? And he goes, "Well, I think he's had a heart attack." And I said, "Really? So what are you?" He said, "I'm a cardiologist." Well, I think that's a really good, example. You only see what's right in front of you, right? Now, there was not a heart attack. It was like a sinus infection. But, and that's what, the pressure, that's why he passed out. But I think who you're talking to, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So if you need business, reach out to somebody who knows something about business. Back to your question in terms of new patients and that being the biggest challenge. I talk about in my book, I give a great story where a dentist reached out to me through somebody else that had referred him to me. And, so we're talking and he's kind of telling me about some of his challenges. And the first question he asked me is, "How can I get more new patients?" And I said, "Well, let me ask some questions. So how many new patients are you seeing right now?" And he said, "About 90 a month." I said, "So what are you producing?" And I tell the story in the book. I think he said I'm doing about 1.5 million a year. And I thought, holy smokes, on 90 new patients a month, that's crazy. Like, how many employees do you have? He's got like 14 employees, including his part-timers, right? And I think that's the thing that you gotta really understand as a dentist and a business owner. Your overhead is all tied to the ability to see these massive amounts of patients, right? And so if you're doubling down on new patients, but you're not presenting a way for the patients to see value, then you're running through a large number of patients in addition to checking hygiene and then doing work, at the same time. Your overhead is out of control. Your payroll is out of control. You've got to have physical plant, supplies, time, payroll. All of that is tied into your ability to see those patients. We think about it like baseball, right? If you're going to the plate 10 times to be able to bat, but you're hitting the ball once, then the way to grow is not to get more at bats, right? The way to grow is to learn to hit the ball 9 times out of 10. And then once we've got that process and that systematic approach in place, now let's figure out, okay, how do we take that hit and let's start gauging it and turning it into, maybe a double rather than a single or a triple or a home run. And then through that, you can find that it doesn't take as many at-bats to be able to score lots and lots of runs. And that may sound like a selfish analogy, but at the end of the day, as a dentist, you're not selling popsicle sticks here. The higher the case acceptance, then the higher it is that you're actually serving your patients. When that happens, it also benefits your bottom line profitability. It benefits your level of fulfillment. It benefits the culture in your practice. There are just so many sideways benefits to that whole thing. So I went off on a tangent there. I'm not sure I answered your questions, but at the end of the day, learning to create value is sales. Case acceptance is sales. And I think, the quicker you get to that realization, the quicker you can really create some joy, not only in your life, but in those that you serve. There's no higher joy than being able to have a patient accept life-changing dentistry rather than fix and repair kind of dentistry. It really brings the joy back to you and those that you serve and your team as well. That when your team feels like they're really making a difference, rather than just fixing people's problems. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a higher level of fulfillment. And so again, that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I do what I do for the last 10 years.
Now, you mentioned acceptance rate. What is a good treatment acceptance rate?
I have heard all sorts of things over the years. I can tell you what I think is a good. I heard somebody say not long ago that 30% acceptance rate is like that. That's like the top. Like that's really what you're shooting for. If you could get 30% of the people that you see to say yes to the dentistry that they need, that's a really good percentage. I think that's hogwash, man. My guys shoot for a 98% treatment acceptance rate. And since you ask, I'll throw this out too. I found literally that case acceptance is one of the least, which I've never understood. It's one of the least tracked. I mean, when I walk into an office for the first time, it's one of the least tracked things out there. And the very, very small percentage of offices that do track it, honestly, they're tracking it, in not the best way. I had an office in St. Louis recently that was really proud of the fact that before I walked in, they were tracking case acceptance. And when I dived into it, like it wasn't making any sense. If you guys have an 89% case acceptance rate, why are you seeing all these patients in your production collection so really low? Well, when I dove into it, they were tracking accepted as scheduled. And so not paid, but scheduled. And even worse than that, which is another story, the doctor had created a bonus system for the person who was presenting the treatment that, she was making a chunk of percentage on each accepted case that was simply scheduled, no financial commitment. And maybe they didn't show up for the treatment or didn't start it or whatever. Maybe they didn't finish it. That's a nightmare. So, accepted is paid. It's paid for. That's the way we look at it. And there's so many ways to be able to make it super duper easy for your patients to be able to say yes. Paying for it is not an issue. This is the value model that I talk about in the book. And when you understand, like you mentioned, the collaborative, dentistry is really, really collaborative. Whereas in dental school, it's kind of like you're individually trying to, learn clinically and so forth. But in dentistry, this is a really good model. We call this the value model. And if you view your clinical exam sort of as the pinnacle of case acceptance, but you realize that there are several steps that happen before your clinical exam. There are several steps that happen after your clinical exam. And if you get everybody on your team involved in each of those roles, and if they know what's coming after and what's going on before, this is one of the processes and systems that can really make a huge difference in your case acceptance rate. I think you were asking me what is a great rate. Our guys shoot for a 98% treatment acceptance rate.
And that's, when you say treatment acceptance, it's paid.
It's paid for.
It's paid for. Yeah, and you're right. If it's not tracked, and if it's not tracked properly, then how do you really know what's going on in your practice, and how do you pivot and adjust if you don't know if it's not working? So
it's a really good point. You know what? It's one of the chapters that we talk, and I didn't mean to interrupt. It's one of the chapters we talk about in this book is tracking. I think one of the key things that I would tell dentists who are listening to this right now is connect with what is your reason for tracking, right? Your reason for tracking is not to have a number show that things are wonderful. It's the opposite of that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, the whole purpose of tracking is for you to be able to figure out where are the opportunities? Where do they lie? And if the numbers are not correct and you get this false reading that everything's wonderful, then you're back in this boat of going, well, what the heck's going on then? Where's my opportunity to grow here?
Yeah. So I really like that V model that you have there. And ultimately it ends in the financial arrangements and making, it comfortable for patients to move forward with treatment, getting them to say yes, and completing the treatment, because you could have a $120,000 CAD CAM machine that's just sitting there, but if you can't get the patient to move forward and say yes and pay for treatment, then it's a waste of money. So treatment acceptance and paid for treatment, I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Is you're presenting this great treatment to patients, it's in their best interest, and get them to educate them and get them to say yes. I mean, and pay for it. And that's the ultimate goal.
That is the ultimate goal. And, you brought up a couple good things real quick. If I could just comment on that, I think that is what you just said in terms of education. I think that is the big myth. And that is it's one of I talk about a whole chapter on that conversation, because it's one of the things that that I've helped dentists through over the years. I think whether you're a dentist or not, right, your goal is to help. And so without conscious thought, I think the natural thing for us as human beings to do is go, look, this patient, I can help this patient. If I educate them so that they know everything I know about this situation, they will make the right decision. And of course, that is just not the case. Education has very little, if anything, to do with great decision making. You could point to things like the illustrations I use are smoking as an example. Listen, if education is all it took, then nobody in healthcare would have ever smoked, because they all are educated on the challenges, obesity, eating right, fitness, right? You could put anything into that category. Education has very little to do with decision making. It's value, understanding how to create value. And as a dentist, you can look in the mouth or at an X-ray, and you don't realize it, but you speak in code. Just like my auto mechanic, he looks under my hood and he sees what's going on, and he looks at this thing and goes, well, there's what you need. But that's code for me. I don't understand what that is, right? I don't know anything about my engine. I don't understand the flux capacitor or whatever that stuff is. The blinker fluid. No. my producer's holding back a laugh on that one. That was an inside joke on the blinker fluid. But truly, I don't understand all of that as a consumer. All I know is, here's what I want emotionally from the ability to have this car. Here's what I want emotionally from my smile. And then from what I want emotionally, once you figure out what it is that I need that can get me that emotion or get me into or out of that emotion, then you can help me see value in what that is. And it really has nothing to do with education. And I think that's one of the biggest, I think that's a frustrator, right? It's a frustrator because you want to help and you're thinking subconsciously, if they know what I know, they're going to do this. But then they don't. And then over time, when out of this abundance of intention to help, right, you're educating. The patients are not seeing value in getting the work done, but they're not going to tell you, hey, doc, I'm sure you're right. I probably do need that crown, but the honest truth is I don't really see value in that thing. Now, that 84-inch ultra thin flat screen television that Best Buy has got on sale right now that I've been wanting to put in for the big game in the man cave, I see value in that, doc. They're not going to tell you that, right? They're going to respond with, how much does that cost? What does my insurance cover? And over time, again, out of this abundance of intention to help, you educate your patients, they respond with, what does it cost? And then you get the wrong message in your head. And over time, you're going, man, my patients can't afford, what they want. You're not thinking about the King's Ranch, F-150 that they're driving, for $85,000, or the fact that they just went and bought, a trip to Mexico or whatever. You're not thinking about all that. You're just getting beat up with the responses that you hear. And over time, it can drag you down to the point where you become afraid to even present the whole case. Or maybe you just talk about this first step, or let's just do the SRP, or let's just talk about the filling first. And then we'll gradually, bring, and that's not fulfilling for you. And really, frankly, it's not serving your patients at the highest level. It's definitely not serving your bottom line profitability, because you're bringing in patient time again to be able to get these little things done. And so, again, understanding the value model and understanding how to create value versus educate, and then understanding, how to maybe challenge your own thinking when it comes to some of those responses. That's the whole reason that I wrote Dental Profits.
Wow, man, that's a great way to put it. Is that I mentioned earlier, you're trying to educate these patients, but are you educating them in the value of the treatment? Are you verbalizing it well enough? Are you getting it through to them that, how much value they'll get out of this crown, this filling, this implant, this new smile, this new bite? I think that is a great way to put it. Now, do you find this gets more and more difficult when offices have 5, 10, 15 PPOs that they're involved with? Or is it still just that mindset of displaying or educating patients on value?
No, there's no difference in whether it's an insurance office or a fee for service office. Of course, the pay is a little better if it's a fee for service office, as everybody knows. But I think it's one of the tenets that I mean, it's, whether you're taking insurance, contracted or not, whether you're fee for service, and I know fee for service means a lot of different things, but any of those things, learning to create value is the key to it. And I would throw it to you this way. Like right now, if you're coming at it from the standpoint of educating patients, whether that's, whatever you're trying to educate a patient on, it's the flip side of what I'm talking about. Right now, there are dentists who are listening to this who are not following through on like a systematic approach like this. And so actually, it's just the one thing. It's just the clinical exam. And so what's happening is you've got a new patient who's come in the door. They're not under the right realization. They're, hey, I'm coming to the dentist because I haven't been to the dentist in the last 15 years and I probably need a cleaning, but nothing hurts. I got no problems, right? And then you look in the mouth and there's, wow, lots of stuff. And at that point, you're making a decision. Do I present the whole thing or do I just talk about one thing? What do I do? And then whatever it is that you present, you spend the next 10 minutes or so trying to talk the patient into by educating them on the value of getting it done or not getting it done and all of that. And that's opposite of where we're trying to go. What I'm talking about is a completely different scenario where the people on your team understand what they're doing initially on, if we're talking about a new patient, on the intake call, how to bring the patient to the proper realization, what happens when we first bring them in the door, and then what happens before you come in as the dentist to do the exam. One of the things I talk about in the book is redefining your exam from this point forward. Make a comprehensive exam be comprehensive in nature. A comprehensive exam is not simply an examination of what's going on in the mouth. It's actually what's going on with the heart and the mind that makes the decision for the mouth. And if you view a comprehensive exam almost like a 50-50 thing, right? You got 50% of the exam is done before you get there. What's most important to the patient's heart and the mind. And then the other 50% of the exam is done clinically after you get that information handed off. Now you're talking about a completely different scenario. Now you're talking about a scenario where when you walk in, the patient already realizes and recognizes they have a problem. Maybe not a physical problem, maybe an emotional problem, maybe they're not proud of their smile, maybe they're not confident, maybe they're embarrassed, whatever that is, right? And then you use that to inform your clinical examination. When that happens, right, when you walk in, the patient already has taken ownership of a problem. They're looking to you for whatever that diagnosis is. That's their solution. Now, instead of you looking in the mouth, finding a problem, with a patient who was not under the right realization, now instead of that, when you walk in, you are the hero. They are looking to you for the solution. You're not the bearer of bad news. You're the one who gets to give them a solution to the problem that they've already taken ownership of before you come in. Now you don't spend 10 minutes trying to talk them into all the bad stuff that can happen if they don't get it, or all the good stuff that can happen if they do get it, right? It's a diagnosis that's going to get them the thing that they most want. And all of us make decisions, emotionally, and that's where that value comes from. I don't know if that makes any sense. I was kind of trying to hurry that up, but does that make sense?
Yeah. Although, can you talk about the intake call and how, your typical intake call is, what's your insurance? Tell me a little about yourself. Let's get you in for cleaning. How do you control that? Yeah. How do you control that intake call to get up that V, to get to that V scenario?
Yeah. I think it's one of the most underutilized situations out there. And I know that there are lots of people who focus on intake calls, and I don't agree with a whole lot of some of the stuff that's out there. To me, the intake call, I call it the lambs process, right? I'm going to listen for why and I've been coaching offices on this specifically, one-on-one with the front desk for well over 2 decades. And we'll use the VoIP and the recordings and so forth to be able to do that. The goal of the intake call is to listen for why the patient's calling, but then immediately take over and begin to ask questions. Because here's the one thing that as somebody who answers the phone up front, you already know what I'm about to say. That patient picked up the phone to call you for one reason. Now, maybe that reason is, do you take my insurance? Maybe it's, what do you charge for a crown? Maybe it's, do you place implants? I don't know, whatever that one thing is. But you also know, as a dentist who is on the receiving end of that, right? You've seen that patient come in, they're here because they want a cleaning and they haven't been in the dentist in 5 years and nothing's wrong. And then they're not prepared for everything you see. You're on the receiving end of that. So you know that one reason the patient calls is not the reason probably that they should be calling, and it's probably not the most important reason for them to call. So the intake call should be viewed as that. I want to ask the patient questions that can bring them ultimately to the realization that maybe the reason they called is a good reason, but it's probably not the most important reason that they should have called. And now after 2.5 minutes of on the phone with me, now this patient understands, well, wait a minute, I'm bleeding when I brush. Maybe I do have something going on there. And I forgot about this broken tooth that wasn't hurting me, and I wasn't thinking about it until you asked me this question, or whatever the case may be. And now you've got a patient who's coming in the door, at least looking for the possibility that something might exist beyond the reason I called, which is, do you take Delta Dental? Right? And so we call that the LAMS process. You want to listen. You want to immediately take control by asking questions, magnify those things that you can along the way, ultimately bring the patient to the proper realization, and then set the final expectations. And the final expectations meaning, set the appointment time and make sure the patient doesn't have any unrealistic expectations about the time frames or whether or not they're going to get a cleaning on the first visit. What are the costs? All of that. But if you do that first, you got a patient who's coming in the door under the wrong mindset, right? You got to get them to the point of realizing that, hey, I don't see any smoke in my brakes and it's not making any noise. But the possibility exists that with 160,000 miles, I might have something that needs to be done based on the question that you just asked.
Now, so that's a really good strategy, is that you're controlling that first phone call. You're taking control of it.
Yeah.
You're not letting them control it. The patient, your staff is being trained on how to
Totally
control this phone call, and with a series of questions. And this is through training, listening back, recording phone calls, and learning from it. Do you work with scripts, or is this just through training and figuring out keywords, or just asking the right questions to figure out what that patient is coming in for?
That is probably the best question that I have been asked today. I have learned over the years that one of the biggest challenges that we have as business owners, dentists, et cetera, one of the biggest challenges is helping the people on our team connect what they're doing right now in this moment to where it is we are trying to go overall. I call that the sincerity approach. I'm always, as a dentist, trying to get my team members to sincerely connect what they're doing right now with what they're trying to accomplish in the performance of this task. And for that reason, I have never been a fan of scripts, because people follow along with the verbiage, but they're not connected with where they're trying to go and they get lost, right? So no, I'm not a big fan of scripts. I've had lots of clients over the years who will come up with, like, for lack of a better word, like a go by, like questions that in case they don't know where to go next, they can refer to. But even that, I think, is not the way to go. The offices that I've worked with who are really great at this concept, they don't really have any questions. They got a blank sheet of paper, and they know in their mind where I'm trying to get this patient to is bring them to the ultimate realization that the reason they called is perhaps not the most important reason that they should call. And I'm just going to ask them questions until I ultimately get them to that place where we don't have any surprises with what the patient presents with, and the patient doesn't have any surprises with what they present with. And that's one of the big keys that I've learned over the years is the surprises. That's the killer, right? That's the killer. The patient wasn't expecting this, or we were expecting that and it showed up like this, or whatever. Those are the things where expectations really come into play in terms of screwing up the day or supporting the day at a very high level and being able to serve the patient. So we don't do scripts at all. I spend the majority of my time helping team members really get to the place where they understand where they're trying to go. They're able to gauge in the moment where they are and where they need to go next.
Okay.
That's like a long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And you made some really good points there. Because if you have a script, I could see, staff members easily getting kind of stuck with that script and not really thinking about the long-term vision and goals of the practice.
Yeah.
I may be a practice that's involved with or trying to get involved with, sleep an airway, clear aligners, implants, full recon, veneers, cosmetics. And I can't be the only one that knows about that. The staff needs to share my vision. And that can't be done with a script. So I think you read a really good point there. So I got to ask you this one thing. So you sent me in my pre-questionnaire something unique about yourself, and you said I got shot in the head. I need to hear this story.
So this is chapter 1. This is one of the things I talk about. It is a long story, but the short version of the story is, and the reason I put it in the book is because for me it was a moment of clarity. You and I were talking a moment ago. We shoot a lot of guns, in this area. I'm a hunter. I've always been a hunter. And the short version of the story is I had given somebody permission to hunt on a farm that we have, and he just broke all the rules. And anyway, he shot me literally. I mean, he was shooting at me. It wasn't like the gun went off. I mean, he was shooting at me. So I took a 12 gauge from about 40 yards right into the left side of my face. I was airlifted to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, immediately put into surgery. And, I got a cool scar I'll show you one of these days, but they cut me all the way down, and they found that one of those pellets was less than a millimeter from my carotid artery. And anyway, the reason I put it in the book is, for me, it was the thing that gave me most clarity. And I think it's something that dentists as business owners can relate to. Up until that point, I had clients literally in 5 different time zones. I was traveling on an airplane every single week to some place to the tune of 205 days a year. I was gone all the time. I was so eager to help. If you needed my help, right, I'm there. And I was gone all the time. When I got shot, the first thing that happened was my vocal cords were paralyzed. I couldn't see out of my left eye, and I was, my whole side of my face was basically just numb. I couldn't talk for an entire year. Through that reflection, right, of not being able to speak, especially for a speaker, is a challenge. Through that reflection, I learned that, the most important thing that you and I have, I know it sounds so trite, but when you're shot in the head, trust me, it's not. The most important thing that you and I have is our time. And I was spending a lot of my time on people who were implementing systematically where it is that, the strategies that we created, and they were growing like crazy. And I had about 50% of my client base that every conversation was me trying to convince them that the strategy that we had talked about is something that they need to implement. And so they weren't getting any results out of it. It was burning me out completely. And, I made a destiny decision that, I wasn't going to work with somebody who wasn't really willing to challenge their own thinking. So I got rid of about 50% of my client base, and I made a commitment that I'm going to go through a vetting process, before we take on a client at the Crabtree Group and before I put my whole heart into it. Now, how does that relate to you as a dentist? Well, it's the same kind of thing. If you're given all day long, and you're on this massive, never-ending search for new patients, and your days and your chairs are filled with patients that are not accepting the work, or worse, it's gotten you beat down to the point where maybe you're not comprehensively diagnosing, or maybe you've already made up your mind that patients in your area are not going to accept or don't have money, or whatever these beliefs are, right? Challenge those things. There's always an easier way. It never has to be that hard. And frankly, if you're seeing 45 or 50 new patients a month, that's a lot. That is a ridiculous amount. And, those kind of numbers on my senior level clients, that's a $3 million practice on 45 new patients, right? So if you're not getting there, and if you're seeing yourself burn out, and you're giving, slow down and don't get shot in the head to have to come to the realization that, what, I love this, and it's not loving me back right now. And it doesn't have to be this difficult. And for the sake of my family and myself and my fulfillment level, let me learn a systematic, better way.
I think that was a great point. You don't have to get shot in the head to make changes. You personally, you did get shot in the head, and that was your eureka moment. But personally, I had a eureka moment where I was totally burned out in the office, and I just said, I can't continue to work like this for the next 30 years. Yeah. And that vetting process that you started, dentists can do that as well. Like you were saying, I mean, we don't have to treat every patient.
Exactly right.
Case selection, patient selection. If you have patients that are constantly, not agreeing with your treatment, not moving forward, they're x-ray deniers, exam deniers, just tell them this maybe it isn't a good fit for them, and, move on. And
I would throw a caveat to that though, like me, I had to implement a vetting process before I came to this place where I'm going to have these, clients that are going to serve where I'm trying to go. I would invite you to do the same, right? If you have a lot of, what did you say? X-ray deniers and exam deniers. If you have a lot of those, listen, before you go booting them out of the practice, right? Do you have a process? I mean, do you have a systematic approach? The intake call is a vetting process. And if the patient is coming in under the wrong realization, the fact that they got in the door is kind of like our fault, right? So what do we need to do so that we are able to not only enjoy the profession at a much higher level, but what do we need to do so that we're, in terms of systematic approach, so that we're able to help people at a higher level and therefore get more fulfillment out of it, right? And that intake call is just one of the things. The other one is a process that we call enlist, which is the actual steps of creating value. We have a process called RPM, which is the actual making the financial part of it as easy as possible to say yes. I can tell you, I did a video recently on to kind of to your point. There are offices out there who go, Sean, we've got a level of crazy, okay, that is higher than most offices. Okay. I mean, we have, like, you don't understand. We got a level of crazy here. But, I've always found that 9 times out of 10, it's because we don't have, patients are showing up the way they're showing up because we don't have an approach to be able to create value for the dentistry, of course, but it's not just that. It's value for the team. It's value for your time. It's value for the doctor as a professional, right? And of course, it's the value for the dentistry. If you don't have systematic approaches for those things, then, you may be turning people away who really could, if their expectation were known and met, they could see value in getting on board with where you're trying to go. They can see value in serving intentionally where it is that you want to be. So I think it's both. It's one, I'm going to stick to this direction, and two, what are the systems that I need to put in place to make sure that we're attracting people who want to be in that direction with us, And that's, we look at your practice as it's totally as your vehicle. It doesn't have to be a job. It's a vehicle to get you where you want to go.
Awesome. Sean, last question before we wrap things up. Young Sean Crabtree, you took that flux capacitor that you were talking about. You went back in time in that DeLorean. You hit 88 miles per hour. What do you tell a young Sean Crabtree, if you could go back and do anything differently, or even like a young dentist out there, a dentist that, is in their 50s, 60s, looking for an exit strategy. If you could tell them something when they were first getting out of school, what would you tell a young Sean Crabtree?
I would tell dentists the same thing that I would tell myself. And that is, it just doesn't have to be this difficult. It just does not have to be this difficult. Start out day one out of school, and before you jump in with all of this vim and vigor to be able to help, before you jump in with this, whatever it takes to be able to help people mindset, right? Before you get into that, stop and figure out, especially if you're in private practice, what are some things that you would like to accomplish personally, professionally, financially, socially, community, whatever that is, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years out, and begin to develop your practice to intentionally serve those things. If you don't determine how your practice is run intentionally in terms of the systems all across it, it's going to consume you. It will take you over. And because you have a sincere desire to help people, you're going to double down on that, and you're going to put the pressure on yourself. And eventually, it's going to pop one way or the other. It's going to show up, as you write about. It's going to show up in a GI scenario or some other physical manifestation, or emotional, mental, or all the above. It will show up. So start out day one and figure out where you want to be, and then get some help in creating those systems so that they can intentionally serve where you want to be and how you want to be. And that even goes back to how many patients do you want to see, right? I mean, when you're eager to help, it's like, throw them at me, man. Whatever many you got, I'm ready to go. And then after a time, that can be too much. So start out day one.
Day one. That's such a good point. Sean, thank you so much. Sean Crabtree, the founder and CEO of the Crabtree Group. Sean, let's be in touch.
Dr. Eric Block, thanks so much for having me. We will.
Thanks so much. Care. And congrats on your book.
Thank you. And you as well.
Thank you.